Representative Sampson.
Thank you, Representative, for your testimony this morning. Just a very simple question, really. I don't agree with your correlation to an automobile, first and foremost, but rather than get into that, I really just want to ask the question that has to do with Section 2 of the bill, or I'm sorry, Section 1-2, which requires the self-defense insurance. I think that no one would say that we would require somebody to have self-defense insurance for their use of an automobile, because I don't know that people do use that. And I just, to me, that is one of the most egregious parts of this bill, is that we're going to require people to have insurance for their actions in self-defense. And I just wondered if you speak to that using your equation.
I think it's a very fair comment, and what we did was we looked to how other states, what other states did, and you know, this isn't all my bill. I worked with other folks, but I would say that I think you make a fair argument, and if the committee decided to strip that section, I would understand it. My big goal, broad-based, you know, for the chairs to understand, is that we look seriously at requiring gun owners to have insurance because, and I know you disagree with the car analogy, but you know, we know that cars cause deaths, and we know that they cause injury, and the idea that someone has to be responsible for those societal costs, the driver bears those costs. We all do. All of us sitting here drive a car and are required to have insurance. So that's my big goal with this bill. Obviously, I'm going to let the committee use its understanding of insurance laws. I'm more of an expert on education laws, but I think your point is a fair one.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator, and forgive me for calling you representative. It's just force of habit.
Fine.
You were a former representative
That's
and
right.
a current senator, and I apologize for that.
No
It was
problem.
not intentional. And thank you for your testimony. Again, I had a thought. It's escaping me, and I'm trying to re-grasp it right at this moment. But it has to do with who's responsible. And again, I would just point out that an automobile and a gun are just tools. The car is not responsible for a death, nor is a gun. It is the person that is driving or holding the firearm that would be responsible for what happens.
And if I could just reply to that, I mean, sometimes, like my son was driving a car down a main street in our town, and the brakes went on him, and he hit the car in front of him. So it wasn't his fault, wasn't the person in front of him's fault, it was an accident. I know that guns can accidentally, you know, shoot. People can drop them, and they can shoot, and people get hurt.
Understood.
And the idea is that that's what this does, is it covers for accidents like that can happen, and other events as well.
Understood. And this was my the reason for my first question, really asking about the self-defense, whether we're trying to get at a potential accident that could occur, because certainly insurance companies are never going to cover intentional acts. And I don't know, it just seems to me that you know, some of the motivation behind this is to maybe connect it with the acts of a mass murder, and I don't think there's any correlation whatsoever. The acts of a mass murder would never be covered by insurance.
I think that what happened in Newtown, and then some of the awareness of what's happening in the suburbs, in many more, a lot of teens die of suicide, and adults too, with guns in the suburbs, and also a lot of innocent people die in our cities. I think the idea of this bill is that Newtown raised this sense that there are people dying every day and being injured, and there's a societal cost to gun ownership that's in the billions in emergency room visits and other things. There are societal costs. And it struck me as an analogy to cars, because it's a very similar thing. There are societal costs to driving a car, and it's a deadly weapon as well. So that's the motivation for this, is trying to make Connecticut safer, and having us as a culture look at what are the costs. And I believe that holding insurance on a gun, if you're at a higher risk, if an insurance company decides you're a higher risk, say you had incidents of some kind of abuse in your home or aggravated assault, you'd probably have to pay higher rates on gun insurance than if you had a perfectly clean record. So the idea is just trying to actuarially figure out what are the costs of gun ownership. And we know that people are dying, but there are other costs as well.
So, I mean, do you have any of that data whatsoever? Because I think what the evidence would show is that the societal costs of automobile ownership are much higher than legal gun ownership. And I think that this bill is only going to apply to legally owned guns. I mean, criminals certainly are not going to do it, and they're responsible for all of the crime and deaths outside of the few accidents that might occur with firearms with law-abiding citizens.
Well, from my previous testimony at another committee, I can tell you that, and I know you had a caveat in the way you described it, but by 2015 in the United States, it's expected that gun deaths will surpass automobile deaths. And we know that since we've put a lot of safety measures in place with automobiles, that the number of deaths by automobile are going down.
Well, but the fact is that the gun deaths you're including are, I'm certain, criminal gun deaths, suicides, and many other things that have very little to do with this requirement for insurance on people that are obeying the law.
We would probably disagree, but I'm not going to.
Well, I'd be curious to know if there's any data that exists that might tell me otherwise, because I really don't believe. I mean, there's tons and tons of data out there about our violent crimes in the U.S. and statistics before and after various weapon bans and so forth. And I think that usually the numbers I see that involve gun deaths include all these other things: criminal gun deaths, even police officers shooting criminals in the act of saving another innocent person would be included in that gun death. So how many gun deaths are actually, would fall in the category?
I can try to find that.
I'd like to know very much.
Find that out. I can try to find that data for you.
Thank you, Senator. And again, forgive me, I don't mean to.
No, I appreciate that's why we're here.
I'd really like the dialogue. I mean, to me, I find this proposal offensive on so many levels. So I understand your perspective. I want to appreciate and respect it, and treat it with the respect it deserves of anybody who brings legislation before us. The constitutional issue is a much bigger one for me. And just as a final question, what do you say to people that would say that you don't have a constitutionally protected right to drive a car, but the Second Amendment and our own Constitution provides for that?
Well, what I would say to you that I totally believe, and the Connecticut right to bear arms is even stronger than the U.S. right to bear arms. I'm not questioning that. You have the right to free speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. The idea is you have rights, but that there are limits on these rights when it comes to public health and public safety, and I think that's what this is trying to address. But I really appreciate your perspective, too, and I think, like most dialogues we've been having through this challenging session, it's been very respectful.
The Supreme Court has already kind of gone through that whole philosophy about whether you can shout fire in a crowded theater or not. You can go out in the woods and shout fire. Just as you couldn't go into a movie theater and fire your gun, you could go out in the woods and fire it. And I think the limitations exist, and they're spelled out in various court cases that have happened in our Supreme Court when these issues have come up before. So I don't know, somehow it seems to me it's above our pay grade in the Connecticut General Assembly to be talking about constitutional law. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.